Let's walk over to those churches. I see something. So what you have behind me is some of the remaining vestiges of the churches in Europe. And this is an old church. I think it's a Roman Catholic church. But a lot of what you see in Europe of the churches are very medieval, ancient. This one even has gargoyles on it. A lot of the churches are simply dead. There's no one in there. Nothing's going on. No one goes to the church. And this is all throughout the landscape of Europe. A lot of these churches have been taken over by Islam, turned into mosques. Some of them have been turned into coffee shops and used for all kinds of other things. And this is kind of part and parcel for all that's going on in Europe. And obviously we're in Switzerland. And like what led up to all of this? Well, it started with go back to the Enlightenment. And then you can go back to German higher criticism of the Bible, and started saying that the Bible was not authoritative, it was written by men. And that started all through Europe, especially in Germany, and that's kind of spread. And that German higher criticism actually came to the United States as well. But anyway, not taking the Bible for its authority, thinking that a lot of the stories were simply myths, and that spread, and so people started becoming secularized. And with Enlightenment thinking, rational thinking and logic is good, but you have to base it with morality. And when you don't have the biblical morality of Christianity, then rational thinking goes astray, and that's what happened to Europe. And so reasoning without biblical morality takes you down the wrong path. And that's what the Enlightenment showed. Enlightenment brought a lot of good things. You know, we want to talk about reason and logic and rationale, but you can't just simply live that way without biblical morality. It just doesn't work. And so what Europe did is thought that they could live in the shadow of the Enlightenment without biblical morality. And that's why a lot of the stories were fairy-taled. It has to do with morality. People just want to live the way they want to live, and they don't want to be told that they're doing wrong. They want to become a god unto themselves, and that's really the basis of everything. And so anyway, that affected Europe, and it spread. And we call it secularization. And that starts taking the place of Christianity in Europe and becomes the dominant force. Well, that can only take you so far, because if you lose your moral narrative, if you lose your anchors morally, then your society will go haywire. You will have no unifying aspect to your society. So, like for instance, where we're at here, this is called Interlaken. And the way the ancient cities in Europe were structured is that you would have the church at the center of the city, and then the city would just grow around the church, and that made your city unified around a central theme, and that central theme was Christ, right? Represented by the church, and that's how all of Europe was kind of laid out in their city structure. It's like it is here. It was centered around the church, but again. That got undermined, and secularism came in, and obviously that has taken over. Okay, so when you bring secularism in, the problem is people are inherently religious, okay? And they're gonna worship something, and whether that's themselves or the creation, whatever it is, they end up worshiping other things. So something will fill that vacuum. And so a lot of what's happened in Europe is the worship of self, radical individualism, to the point that I'm going to do what I want to do. No one's going to tell me any different. I'm going to live the way I want to live, and I don't care who it affects. And so that's hurting them. And we see this in America, this radical secular individualism that I want to just live the way I want to live, and you're not going to tell me what to do. And then that really goes back to the garden. That's the idea of you can become a god, determining right and wrong. That's what people do when you have secularism and take Christianity out. And unfortunately, when you see wokeism, you see LGBT, you see transgender, you see all these isms and stuff like that, that is what is filling the gap now once you kick Christianity out. And so that's what's going on in Europe. Okay, but that's happening in America too. We're I don't know, 5-7 years ahead of Europe where they're at. And that's pretty scary, because when you're here, you can see it on the ground, and there's a spiritual deadness. And so Europe has lost its unifying factor. And now, what does Europe have to do to unify people? Since it's not going to use universal principles of Scripture, like thou shalt not steal, or honor your father and mother, thou shalt not murder, all those unifying principles that keep your society together, then you have to have another unifying principle, and you have to force it on people. The interesting thing about God's universal principles is they're unifying, and everyone accepts them. Everyone knows that stealing is wrong. That's written on the heart of man, the law of God. Okay, so if you take that out, you still have to have a unifying factor, because your society will disintegrate. And so what Europe has done is create another false religion of secularism, saving the planet, going green, those types of things have to become now unifying factors. So one of the virtue signal was saving the planet, or whatever. Having sex with everyone you want to have sex with, LGBT, transgender, all that junk, right? So they have to force that on the society to get a unifying factor. And yet, it's not indicative to people. Saying that a man can become a girl, or a girl can become a guy, that has to be forced. And that's what they've done, right? They had to force that. The Olympics had to force that on, because people don't readily accept that. And so that's what ends up happening. You have a community, a society, a culture now unified by the elites forcing things on them and forcing people to accept it. And unfortunately, like so many people, not just the Europeans, but Americans and Canadians and Australians, a lot of people just accept it. They accept what the elites push on them as a unifying factor, and they go with it. And so unfortunately, that's what we have. And unfortunately, that's coming to America. So it's something that affects all of society. So dead churches end up signaling that you're losing your culture. Your culture is not being unified, it's not coming together on universal principles, and therefore it's fragmenting and coming apart at the seams. And that's why in the scriptures you see why they have to implement a global government. And in that global government, they will use the whore of Babylon and her values to force on people. And those values are going to be opposite of what God says, right? The whore of Babylon will have her religion, and it's the opposite, right? It's if God says this is good, she says this is bad. If God says this is bad, she says this is good, and then they will be forced. So that's why, like in the book of Revelation, she rides on top of the beast, and the beast's government is the global government, and she rides on that. So the government of the world, the global government, will support her, and by supporting her, push her values to have a unifying factor, because that's the problem that Daniel says about the global government. It's partly fragile and partly strong. It's iron mixed with clay, and they don't adhere to one another. So in order to get this accomplished, they have to force it. But it started a long time ago in Europe when they lost the church, when they lost the authority of Scripture, when they stopped believing in God and they stopped believing in the Bible, and they went their secular way, thinking they can live in rationalism, reason, and logic without morality. And so it ended up getting them where they're at, and eventually a one world government that will force its way on people. So, long story short, God's principles are unifying factors for society, and if you don't have them, then someone else will tell you how to live. Someone else will force their values on you, and you will not like that. So you either accept God's values and be unified by those values, or you're going to accept somebody else's values, another human's values, and you may not like that because typically it's totalitarianism. So anyway, I'll check out for now. Continue to watch us, subscribe, like, and share all these videos because we want to get the word out and the truth about what's going on in the world. God bless you. We'll see you next time.